We had lunch, and at the end of lunch, we said, John, we have some bad news for you, but we have some good news too. And he was a patient guy, thank God. And he said, okay, what's the bad news? And we told him why the product that he had invested in failed. We answered all of his questions. And then he said, okay, I understand. What's plan B? What's the good news? So we started telling him about yes, which we had completely at this point architected. And when we were all done talking and he could have said, yes, I want that $15,000 back, he didn't say that. Here's what he said instead. I didn't invest in Margin Maker. I invested in the two of you guys, and I like this idea better. Do you need any more money?
Welcome to Season 5 of Manage Self, Lead Others with host Nina Sunday. This season, we're going deeper into AI, innovation, and the invisible patterns that shape how we lead. Each episode, bold thinkers join us to explore how to lead with intention, elevate team culture, and stay future ready. The future of leadership starts with the questions we ask.
When your client or prospect goes on holiday, do you make a note in your client history so that next time you speak, you can ask, how was Japan? It's a small thing, a human thing, and it's what makes you stand head and shoulders above your competitors. When Mike Muhney co-invented ACT software back in the 1980s, the vision was simple: be the person that always remembers. CRM, customer relationship management, had to start somewhere. Before CRM was an industry, before Salesforce, before the internet had arrived, what did salespeople do to keep track of client history? If you were like me, you had an index card system, hundreds of cards, A to Z, with matching date cards to remind you who to call and when. That was customer relationship management then. My guest today is Mike Muhney, co-inventor of ACT, the first CRM software designed to manage sales relationships from a computer. Released in 1987, it's acknowledged as the catalyst that created the multi-billion-dollar CRM industry, and over tens of millions of people have purchased ACT, including me in the early 90s. If you've ever used a CRM, you've used Mike's idea. And Mike built it all before the internet, when software shipped on floppy disks and there was no such thing as an update. If you're a leader with an idea for a new product, this episode is a masterclass in innovation under pressure, the pain of the beginning, the moment you know it's working, and the culture that carries a team through. Welcome, Mike Muhney. And your story starts with a brainstorm. You had one software product in development, not yet launched, and an investor about to arrive to check out their investment, and you and your partner identified it was not going to launch, and a CEO mentor suggested you spend 4th of July brainstorming the next step. So tell us about that.
Yeah, ACT was really born out of a Hail Mary pass, as we at least call it here in America. Our first product was designed for a very specific component in a very specific industry. We thought it was going to be a huge growing market. Obviously, out of the $100,000 that the angel had invested in us, $85,000 now spent, we were nearly broke. And Pat and I admitted to each other, and these were the exact words we used, Nina, this dog ain't gonna hunt anymore, right? And so then we said to each other, since we have a blank sheet of paper, is there anything that we wish existed that we need ourselves, just you and me? What do we wish we could have access to? And with that thought, we said, well, let's think of some things we wish existed. And we were looking at our paper date timer system at the time, and we started talking about that, and we said, the interesting thing about paper systems, which is what everybody used back then, obviously, was that you could record your activities on your schedule and activity, but it's across many days, weeks, months, and years, and none of them are collected or aggregated, but every one of them points to a person or persons that those activities were for. So why don't we instead focus on the relationship and tie all those activities to the person, but focus on the person and not the activities. And with that comment, Nina, we began to pull the proverbial thread, and we all of a sudden started the fabric of what in 9 months was ACT on the market. So it was, what do we need ourselves, you and me?
So, did you have to become a coder, a techie person to create this
Well,
product?
yes and no. I mean, at IBM, I had to learn how to program many languages,
Right.
but my calling in life was not to be a programmer. I, my calling was to, as a sales guy, sell these computers and have full-time technical people. And so I had to learn to, connect with people and how to win their favor, how to win their business, right? But it always started with the relationship. And
Yes.
so here's one of the things in IBM sales school that they taught us. It was a question on one of our first days of class for the next 6 months nationwide. They said to us, okay, when you have that first meeting with a customer, typically a C-level executive, what is your attitude going into that meeting? And all of us thought we were so smart. We said, well, we want to convert them into a customer as quickly as possible. And the IBM instructor just went like this: you are all wrong. And he said, what you need to do is have an attitude and a mindset going into that first meeting as if you were approaching a friend or somebody you wanted to become your friend, because you'll treat them differerly, you'll act more naturally, and you'll connect more easily. They are not going to start to think of you as a friend. That's not the point. The point is, if you go in there as a business transaction mentality, you're going to be more rigid and coarse and to the point, but you haven't connected with them yet. The whole point is you got to connect first in order to then have a chance to make the sale. So that's an important lesson. Another
Yeah, I
thing that
totally
I
agree with you, Mike. And when I think about when I had a business with salespeople and coordinators, I did a flip, and it would have been about 15 years ago now, because I don't have the big payroll and team anymore. But I do remember I stopped from doing a presentation when I met with a client and doing a diagnostic. And I went in with questions. And honestly, transference occurred. In other words, that's a psychoanalytical phrase. In other words, when people tell you their story, they kind of assign a loyalty and an intimacy, a business intimacy, because you
Mhm,
now know what their problems are, what their needs are, and
mhm,
what their story is. So that
mhm.
completely flipped our approach to sales. It's like go in with questions, not with answers. Well, that's fantastic grounding, and I understand now why you've said in some other podcasts that I've listened to that your culture was, when you were growing ACT from the very beginnings, how the culture manifested was important. So, can you tell us about the culture in those early days? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I think by human nature, we're all attracted to people that we find some likability factor exists, right? Hey, I enjoy speaking to you. You seem to be a good person. People talk greatly about you. So we are inclined and attracted to, as kind of magnet and steel, to the people that are kind of like us. Now, we can't exclusively surround ourselves with people exactly like us. So, yes, there are introverts and there are extroverts. There's technical people, there's marketing people, there's all kinds of people. But what we did is we looked for people that had integrity, people that admitted that they didn't know something, people that admitted that they made a mistake, people admitted that they failed. They were vulnerable, which meant they were authentic.
And they were
And
cooperative too, because
yes,
they didn't have a
correct.
facade or a mask. Yeah, they were
That is
cooperative
correct. And
people. Yeah.
right, and they had no, and I mean no sense of arrogance,
Mm.
because arrogance is ego centered. The value of a real relationship will never go away. But in today's world, we've got to learn how to exacerbate that authenticity that I have and network with people to maintain real relationships.
Mm.
I mean, real relationships. You can't go on social media and think that that is your network. No, you've got to get out there and face to face, shake people's hands, look at their face, let them see your face, laugh with each other in order to expedite making that connection, right?
So you'd been spend how long did you spend when you realized that the dog wasn't going to hunt? Was that a year or six
No,
months?
no. It lasted about 8 months. From
Right,
the time we got the $100,000 to the time we only had 15,000 of it left was about 8 months.
right. And so you got this new idea from the brainstorm. And actually, did you have lots of ideas and then you had to pick one? How did you arrive at the one idea? Or
No, no. Once we started looking at that day timer and activities versus the relationship, we just focused with blinders on okay, if it's going to be a software product about relationships, what would the product need to do,
yes,
right? And
that's
so
right.
at the breakfast table, we started the napkin, and I still have the original napkin of the
I hope
of
it's
the
framed.
it is, well, it's protected by a plastic cover.
That's
Um,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, what we did is the angel investor was coming down in about a month. And so we only had a month's time to completely architect the product. So Pat and I furiously designed the whole product. I mean, everything, every pixel on the screen, everything. So that when the angel came down, we had a plan B to tell him. So here's what happened 4 months or 4 weeks later. We picked him up at the airport. We went to lunch. His name is John McNair. We had lunch, and at the end of lunch, we said, John, we have some bad news for you, but we have some good news too. And he was a patient guy, thank God. And he said, okay, what's the bad news? And we told him why the product that he had invested in failed. We answered all of his questions. And then he said, okay, I understand. What's plan B? What's the good news? So we started telling him about yes, which we had completely at this point architected. And when we were all done talking and he could have said, yes, I want that $15,000 back, he didn't say that. Here's what he said instead. I didn't invest in Margin Maker. I invested in the two of you guys, and I like this idea better. Do you need any more money? We had no idea he was going to say anything like that. We were shocked. We kind of held our excitement inside thinking, oh my gosh, we're not going to fail. We're not going to die, right? And Pat and I both simultaneously said, yes, we do need more money. And he said, how much? And we simultaneously, with no hesitation, said, $50,000. He opened up his sport coat, pulled out his checkbook, and at that lunch table wrote us a $50,000 check. He left the next day. I called up the CEO that suggested we have this brainstorm breakfast. His name was John Pertel. I said, John, we got to come and talk to you. You're not going to believe what happened. So Pat and I went and had lunch with him. And we said, John, we took your advice. We had the July 4th breakfast for 4 hours. We came up with an idea. It's codenamed Yes. Here's what it does. The angel liked it so much, he invested another $50,000. Can you believe that? And here's what John Pertel said, all going back to IBM saying, call it the top. Okay. He said, you know what? I like that idea too. In fact, I've got two friends who also might like this idea. Why don't you come to my house later in the week in the evening? I'll have those guys over and you and Pat do your pitch. So that evening, later in the week, Pat and I went there. We met the other two guys. We did our pitch. And by the time we left the house that evening, those three men wrote us $400,000 in checks. And 9 months later, ACT was in a box on the shelves all across the retail channel in America. So, in the space of, if you think about it, in the space of basically 10 months, we went from we were going to close down the business. We had failed with our idea, our first idea, but by seeking a mentor, by taking their advice, and by allowing ourselves to go deeper inside of us and see what we had in us to come up with an idea, 9 months later, we were in business with $450,000 in added investment. When Pat and I came back to the company, and we started to hire a few people, right? After this investment, $450,000 that we had gotten, we had an enthusiastic excitement level that was unmistakable, and that is a contagious kind of a characteristic to have, as is depression, as is despondency. So if you're negative, worried, afraid, the people are going to pick up on that. This is common sense, right? But we had an enthusiasm level that was indescribable. We were so excited we were onto something, and they began to feel it. And as they started to work with the product too, they realized it themselves. And now, when the product became available on the market, and we started to win awards and get the press coverage we were getting, which was enormously positive. People just had this, I work for a great company, I'm part of something meaningful, and they had this sense of dignity and self-worth that they were associated with, and that in themselves was contagious to everybody they encountered. So you can see how there's kind of an ebb and flow of the culture that you create based on your own attitude that not only you have, but that you display toward the people. Leadership is something that is earned. It is not commanded or dictated that I get from people.
And getting excited about the origin story, because when people are being onboarded, they need to know the origin story that kept you enthusiastic at the start and continues to be. So that's important too. You saw, there was I've listened to a couple of your older podcasts, and there was the story about how you went to a trade show and was showing off this new product, and there was such a buzz. Tell us about that moment.
Okay. Well, in America, back in that era, there was an annual convention in Las Vegas called Comdex. And again, there was no internet back then. So people, vendors would go and get a booth, and people would come and talk to them to talk to the real people behind the product, whether it was hardware or software. So we got a 20-foot wide by 50-foot long booth, which meant we were an island. And we had a screen behind us, and I had my laptop, and I was doing ACT demos. And we had 50 chairs in our booth for people to sit down. Why? So we could grab their attention. Because a typical exhibitor at a convention has a pedestal with a computer screen on it. And one person walks up, and you're talking to one person, but then another person walks up and you're talking to them, and that first person walks away. Pat and I knew if we do it that way, it's going to be a very, it's going to be a very meager result we can expect. So if we put chairs down, which nobody had at Comdex, people would go, oh my gosh, a place to sit down. Okay, so people would sit down, but the interesting phenomena, Nina, was that people would look at people sitting in those chairs. There weren't any left available, but they would turn around and stand in the aisles and watch my presentations. What happened is, on the aisle were 10 by 10 exhibitors, and one of them at the end of the week, when we had hit a grand slam home run, we knew we had hit the ball out of the park. He ran up to us afterwards as we were leaving the convention, and he said, I love ACT. I want to buy your product. I've got $1 million cash. Excuse me. I can wire it to you next week. And I was like, what? And he was relentless, but we finally said, no, we're not going to sell the company. That guy was Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, offered us $1 million with ACT being on the market only 6 months. Now, if you tie that to going back to when we said this dog ain't gonna hunt, in the space of 16 months, we went from shutting down a failed business to being offered $1 million. And 8 months later, or excuse me, 6 months later, we were offered $6 million for the company. A year and a half later, we were offered 16 million. And as time went on, we kept being offered by Silicon Valley firms more and more money. And 7 years later, we did sell the company.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
fabulous story, and congratulations. And never say die. You've been doing other things in the interim, but coming up in the next episode when it's finally launched, what are we going to be hearing about, Mike?
Pat and I, the other co-inventor of ACT, we got back together and we started a company called Contata, Contatta. It's an Italian word that means make contact. Why did we do that? Because CRM took away the relationship component in the customer relationship management. It's really customer data management.
Yes.
Okay. And so it has nothing to do with the relationship. And Pat and I want to take the world back to the relationship.
Oh, lovely.
In order to do so, we had to create another product that will exceed everything we did in ACT. And we want to put a dent in the world again and help people go back to genuine, meaningful, authentic relationships.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I look forward to a repeat episode when we can talk all about Contata and its development. So there's a whole life between when you sold ACT to Semantic and where you are today. So thank you so much for sharing that story, because you are a true godfather of the CRM industry. Anyone in sales can't live without their CRM. Thank you, Mike. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for bringing your authentic self to manage self-lead others.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
My guest today was Mike Muhney, co-creator of ACT software, and now coming up soon, the new software Contata. And you can find Mike Muhney at contata.com, Contatta. And stay tuned, because we'll be talking to Mike again about his new relationship management system launching soon. My name is Nina Sunday. This is the Manage Self-Lead Others podcast. And do go in and give us a review on either Apple or Spotify, and tell your friends about our podcast. And bye for now.
The conversations from Manage Self-Lead Others became a book, not transcripts. Nina Sunday's reflections on the ideas and stories explored with her guests on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. You can also invite Nina to facilitate a workshop with your organisation or run a conference session that sends your audience away with a plan. Australia, Asia, and beyond. Details at ninasunday.com. And if this podcast is useful to you, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or rate it on Spotify. It helps the right people find it.